Inquisitor Kryptman, a former member of the Ordo Xenos, is the Imperium's most foremost expert on all things hive mind. Having successfully held the Tyranid menace at bay through numerous segments of the Imperium, he has played a crucial role in many actions against the forces of the hive mind. He earned his expulsion from the Ordo when he executed a scorched earth retreat across the wide swath of the Imperium, committing the single largest act of genocide in the Imperium's history. All to try and rob the Tyranids of the biomass necessary to survive. In a similarly radical strategy, Kryptman, with the help of Death Watch loyal to him, succeeded in redirecting the Tyranids to the Octarius war zone, where he hoped the immovable Ork hordes would meet the unstoppable hive fleets, and they would burn each other out. Was the Kryptman Gambit in the Octarius war zone inspired genius or ultimately madness? Today, we have myself, John, joined by Adam and Danny. Adam, let's start with you.
So going with the information that he had at the time, I think that was maybe the smarter decision for him, because it basically almost like killing two birds with one stone. He's able to take care of or at least divert the attention of the Tyranids from heading towards Terra, and then also diverting the Wog from the Orks and having them hit head on, almost like a perpetual motion machine where it just keeps on going. And I think the idea of containment is probably what's working best for them, as much as it costs overall. But I think in terms of the resources that they have available, especially what's going on with the Citrix Maledictum, I think that's really the only answer that they have, and the only one that he can do, even if it starts to evolve some of the Tyranids or the Orks, because we all know that for Tyranids, they adapt, and Orks get bigger as the battles progress, and they get bigger and better foes to fight. That being said, I still think that it's a plot. I agree with the idea to do this, and the reasons as I just stated. It allows them to better control where the enemy goes, and allows them better containment to limit the damage that they can do. Yes, you're going to lose a lot of people, you're going to lose a lot of materials and manpower and planets, but in regards to the grander scheme of things, it's probably a loss they can sustain and still survive. So because at this point for the Imperium, it's just survival mode. They just got to do what it takes to survive. And I think this actually helps in that. And with the proper checks and balances in there, I think they can keep it contained as long as they can.
All right, Danny, you want to come in with the con to that?
I think it's a very poor decision that lacks a larger understanding of what makes the Orks and the Tyranids so dangerous. Especially for the Tyranids, they're an army that victory is never costly for them, right? Like, the Imperium is capable of Pyrrhic victories, right? Where it's like, yes, we won, but now this system is crippled, or we lost this many chapters of Space Marines that we're never getting back, et cetera, right? Like, other armies can win, but be crippled in a campaign by a victory. Tyranids, victory is only ever victory, right? Because if they win, all their dead soldiers are come back, right? Like, they just reabsorb the biomass. Everyone they've killed, all the planets they conquer is more biomass, right? So if they win, it's always just a total victory for them. And you start throwing that into the mix of, so you can't out attrition them is the point, right? Like, you can't just like, okay, yes, we're going to let them win here, here, and here, but they're going to be so exhausted and their resources so depleted, they won't be able to finish the campaign. That doesn't work on Tyranids. And then you throw that in with the Orks, who are very much the same way. They have more traditional resources, but they also get stronger. They get more resilient after every combat. So for those survivors, they are much more effective fighting forces, right? Like, again, if you have 1 billion Orks and they go into a meat grinder and only 1,000 survive, that 1,000 Orks are going to be ungodly powerful fighters, right? So, that's not exactly more so than like just a veteran Space Marine, right? Now you're getting like thousands of war bosses essentially running around. And with Orks, because they reproduce by spores, you can cripple their cities, they can lose entire continents, and they can still come back, right? So you create this kind of Adam said it, a perpetual motion machine, but it's eventually one's going to break, right? They're not going to just be stalemated back and forth. Eventually one side will win, and whichever side wins is going to be far stronger than they ever could have possibly been had they not encountered each other, right? I think that's Krypton's big mistake, is he's thinking, his calculus was, well, I'm buying time for Terra to kind of get its defenses ready to face Leviathan. And I'm also buying time for other regions in the Imperium that don't have to deal with the Octarius Wog. Right, that was his logic. But the reality is that whoever wins that, there's no way, unless every Imperium resources was dedicated to containing the winner of the Octarius War, they're not going to be able to stop them, because you're just going to have, essentially, whoever wins that is going to be one of the scariest fighting forces in the galaxy, right? And there's just, again, the Imperium is massive, and that's one of the things that I think people tend to forget in the fluff is, like, if the Imperium actually focuses everything it has in one region, it's this unstoppable war machine. But it might not be against the winners of the Octarius War, right? Whether it be the Leviathan or it be the Orks, right? And, right now it looks like the Tyranids are winning, which is actually the worst outcome. Because, if the Orks do defeat the Tyranids, how much fuel did they spend? How many Mega Gargants did they lose? How many ships did they lose, right? That they now have to take time to rebuild before they can go out and start causing trouble. If the Tyranids win, they're ready to invade wherever they want to go next immediately, right? With just kind of this huge armada. So I think Krypton, I understand why he did it. It's just, I don't think he really understood the nature of the threats he was dealing with.
Okay, yeah, I mean, I feel like Kryptman is also a little bit of just kind of a madman in general. Like, when you see him in the other books that he's in and things, and the other parts of the fluff, and the decisions he makes, a lot of the times he's, like, on that bleeding edge of, is this the appropriate action or the inappropriate action? I think one of the first times we see Kryptman is in one of the Ultramarine books, and it's you've got Captain, oh man, who was that? One of the captains, and he's former Death Watch, and Kryptman, he's got to stop this world that's under Ultramar's sway from being destroyed by Tyranids, and they're losing, even though they have the help of the Mortifactors chapter, and they come up with this crazy idea of, like, Kryptman and a biologist come up with, like, some way to infect, like, the Norn Queen mothership, and they go on this crazy, like, covert action to board the ship and infect it, right? And then he gets in a bunch of trouble because, like, that's all against the Codex Astartes, right? Because, like, anytime an Ultramarine goes against the Codex Astartes, it's bad news for them. But Kryptman's at the center of that. Like, he's the guy who's like, let's do these crazy things to try to get rid of this Tyranid threat, because I think he does, to a certain extent, understand the threat. I just don't think he understands fully, like you were saying, Danny, that, like, well, if they kill all the Orks, they just consume all their biomass, and now they're unstoppable. So that's not a good outcome. And yeah, so the Orks do get bigger and bigger and bigger as they win or fight, because they don't have to win to get bigger, right? They just have to, like, fight somebody else. So that's going to be a problem too. But I think he created, like, the worst outcome by sending that Leviathan tendril towards Octarius, and then Swarmlord gets involved, which getting Swarmlord involved probably wasn't a good idea either, because now you have the Tyranid's, like, greatest Tyranid warrior himself going out after things and causing a bunch of problems, and learning how to defeat other people, and learning how to defeat all kinds of other new enemies, and then being able to apply that against the Imperium itself, because he'll have absorbed all of the Orcs' knowledge and abilities and all that kind of stuff. So it just feels like desperation, which I think is something Adam talked about, how, like, the Imperium is constantly just trying to stop the bleeding, or the Imperium is constantly just putting out fires. And I think the Tyranids are an interesting part of the fluff, because they represent the fire that they can't just put out, right? Like, you can't just put out little fires of Tyranid tendrils here and there, because eventually the entire fleets are going to hit, and eventually you lose. But the Tyranids don't just win; the Tyranids win big, because the Tyranids get everything you had in terms of people back. Like, the best option would be let them burn themselves out against the Necrons, because if they're fighting Necrons, they don't get anything when they win, right? And so if you can get the Tyranids to fight the Necrons, then you're set, because no matter who wins, whoever wins is going to be weaker, period. So I like the idea. I don't know if I like the enemy he chose.
I think that's something important to kind of point out, is that, like, what, who the Tyranids hate running into the most are the Necrons and Chaos Demons specifically, right? Because they're the two armies that they can't use their advantage, which is that they don't wage traditional war, right? Like, they don't have traditional logistic centers. They don't have kind of like the basics of what we think of as military doctrine, right? Like, they don't need to feed their troops. They don't need supplies. They don't need leadership in the same way, right? Like, they have distinct organisms that do that. But even if you kill all the synapse creatures, it's not like the Hormagaunts and Termagants run away. They just go to their instincts, which can still cripple you, right? Like, that's still a problem to deal with if you've got swarms of, Hormagaunts kind of hunting all over. And so I think, yeah, if Kryptman had been like, oh, hey, I know of this massive Necron tomb world that has a huge Necron garrison in it. Let me get him over there and see if I can wake him up. And that would work. Or hell, even like, I'm going to open a giant chaos rift and just get a bunch of corn demons to pop out here. And, that'll do it. But the orcs are definitely the wrong target for that. And it actually reminds me of something of the discussion of like, Max Brooks's World War Z, where they're interviewing one of the generals, and he's talking about the fact that, like, why humanity couldn't win against the zombies in the beginning was purely that militaries are designed to fight conventional militaries, right? And when you're fighting an army that doesn't follow those logistics, our weapons tend to become relatively useless. And that's, again, very apropos to the Tyranids, and that, you can't destroy their supply lines, right? Because, like, if you're fighting them, you are the supply line, right? Like, if you're killing them, great, but unless you completely wipe them out, every dead soldier can just eventually be reclaimed and recycled and turned back into something else, oftentimes something stronger, because they've adapted to your tactics or adapted to your weaponry. And all of a sudden you've got, armor, you've got reinforced armor, or you've got stealthier things to sneak in, or whatever it might be. So I think, the idea itself might have been correct. It's just Octarius was probably the exact wrong place to do it.
Okay, a few things. John Kryptman was the original biologist that discovered and named the Tyranids. So his knowledge of the race is probably second to none. So, and then the story you're thinking about is with Ventress.
Yeah, that's right. Uriel Ventress.
When he was part of the Death Watch, where they make the poison for the Norn Queen. But having said that, in regards to his knowledge, it's not out of ignorance that he decided to do this. I think it's because of what he's learned about the Tyranids and about what he knows about orcs, even though the orcs aren't his specialty. And I think being able to work with that knowledge is why this is probably the best idea he could come up with. Because there's also a few things in regards to some of the other options. Necrons, Tyranids, unless they change the fluff, which I don't believe they did, Tyranids actively avoid Necron tomb worlds. So there's no way to lure them to one because they know there's one there and they'll just avoid it. Chaos is a bit more tricky, only because, we currently have a chaos issue to begin with, and adding to that chaos issue is probably not the best thing at the moment. So, I mean, those both are probably viable options, but in a practical sense, they're probably harder to pull off. Necrons because the Tyranids just avoid the planets. Chaos because it's chaos, and more than likely it would probably get out of hand if they tried to control it.
Or they could just save the Blood Angels.
We don't speak.
But even then, that
wasn't.
Yeah, That was just, and that was on a whim. So even then, yeah, you can cause a chaos rift, but that doesn't mean they'll show up. Or they may just show up and not do anything, or mutate them in such a way, or it makes them even tougher, kind of like what's happening now. So especially if it's Tzeentch, luckily for the Blood Angels, it was a bloodthirster that happened to like them in some weird bloodthirster way.
I think that connects to that Khorne wants the Blood Angels, right? Isn't that always been the fluff that Khorne wanted Sanguinius too?
Yeah,
and the Blood Angels, and so they're kind of like, well, if anyone's going to eradicate the Blood Angels, it's going to be me.
yeah. So I don't think those two options are viable. And this one, he's already developed a poison for obviously a different strain of Tyranid, but he can do it again if he needed to. And which is why we have all these kill teams and special forces and all these armies and things like that. I think that we may not know it, but I wouldn't be surprised if there's some type of contingency. I mean, it is 40K, so it probably will never happen. But in terms of the different types of world-shattering weaponry that is at the disposal of the Imperium, I mean, this is a guy that would literally kill planets ahead of the swarm just to deny them food, whether there are people on it or not. He doesn't care about that.
Yeah, he was like officially sanctioned by the Inquisition, like removed as like an Inquisitor. And when he goes on that Death Watch mission to like capture the Gene Stealers and put them into stasis to redirect the whole thing, he's kind of doing that as like a rogue agent. Like he's kind of doing it just with the support of the Death Watch members who are loyal to him, because Space Marines don't care if you actually have a title or not. They're like, hey, you have a good idea and we like you, so we'll do what you say. So yeah, he had like lost his inquisitorial rosette and all that stuff because he was just burning whole systems with like, the Exterminatus that were in the path of, I think it was Leviathan, right?
It's Leviathan, yeah. And it's Carta Extremis is what he is declared. Yeah, Carta Extremis, where he's not a heretic, so he's not actively hunted, but he has all of his authority as an Inquisitor stripped. But the Death Watch are very loyal to him because obviously he's worked very closely with them. So they were, when he comes to them with hey, I got this plan. I need some Gene Stealers. They're like, yeah, whatever, bud. Let's do it.
Yeah, the Space Marines care very little if you wear the Inquisitorial rosette around your neck or not. They're like, whatever, puny human. We'll do it. We like your plan.
Yeah, so I think that's why the idea has merit, and in the long run will probably help the Imperium, because they do have these, or he has at his disposal still, even when in trouble, to bring about forces, and the Imperium does that. They just need to take care of to get rid of that particular strain of Tyranid or that particular WA if it becomes too powerful. Whether it's virus bomb. The WOG is probably easier to disrupt than the High Fleet, because you just need to kill the war boss or kill certain war bosses, and you disrupt the planet, and then they're easier to handle. Tyranids, on the other hand, they would probably just virus bomb and just kill all organic life. So just like he's already done it, where he just kills everybody and everything, every biological matter on the planet, and basically so that the Tyranids cannot take advantage of it and lose matter, especially if they start to lose ships and material over the course of the battle while the Imperium's doing that. So that's why I don't think it's a bad idea, and I think it's based off of Kryptman's knowledge from the very beginning, literally from the very beginning of the Tyranids when they were first discovered. And that's why I think that it's an idea that has merit, and I think it's an idea that can hopefully in the long run will bear fruit. But there's a lot of other stuff going on right now, so and there's a lot of kill teams out there, and Death Watch and all these other special forces doing what they need to do. And that's why I think if they need to, they can probably destabilize certain aspects of the hive mind or the Orc WOG, whichever one starts to, if they need to. So I think they're playing some type of small balancing act where they don't want to get one side too powerful, but at the same time, they don't want to get the other side too powerful. So it's a very delicate space where they're at right now, and it's costing them men and material right now. But I think in the long run is when it will save more lives than it's costing.
So this is the Warhammer 40K version of 4D chess, is what we're saying.
Whether he believes so or not, yes, it's one of those like you're not thinking on my level. I think I would hope. I don't know.
All right, Danny, last thoughts from you?
Yeah, I mean, I totally see that argument. I just think that as much as Kryptman understands how Tyranids work, I don't know if he totally understands how long-term military and strategic planning works, especially when you have such wildly different forces that operate on different rules, like the Tyranids and the Orks. Because, right now, at least according to the fluff, the Tyranids are winning, right? Like they've killed the Overfiend of Octarius, right? And the Orks are now kind of scattered a little bit. They don't have the same unified leadership. It's just like the Orks, though, any of the survivors of that war and the Orks are going to be so freaking mean and are going to be so powerful and capable of starting their own wogs somewhere else that even if, Kryptman's plan kind of works in the short term of like, okay, Tyranids win, Imperium virus bombs pretty much the entire sector, which I don't think they can because there are important Imperial, planets there with like manufacturing capabilities they have to try to protect. But let's say they do that, they virus bomb everything and they're able to kind of wipe out Leviathan, starve it of its food, and then engage it and blow it to hell. What happens to all of those Orc survivors that fled, right, but are these huge battle-hardened warlords that suddenly now you've got 4 or 5 new wogs somewhere else with these, incredibly tough battle-hardened veterans. And, Orcs always get the reputation for being stupid. And to be fair, they are. Except, when you get to be a war boss level, they have a pretty acute understanding of war and what they've learned. So, you're going to have some pretty burly ass Orcs running around who are going to create their own little wogs. And so, the problem is going to kind of shift out of Octarius and into different systems. And so you're going to be maybe in a worse position because now instead of having one problematic zone, you've got 5 more, right? For an empire that's already kind of trying to put out a million different fires at all times. So we'll see. I don't think it was the right play, but maybe it was the only play, to be fair. Right? Maybe otherwise Leviathan would have hit Terra and destroyed Terra.
Okay. Those are good points. Hopefully you've enjoyed our discussion about Kryptman and whether or not his Gambit is a good idea or whether or not it's going to pay off. We'd love to hear what you think, so go ahead and leave some comments wherever you've seen this posted and let us know what your thoughts are on the topic.